right, think about this for a minute. What kind of life do you live? How well off are you? I don't mean like financially, how well off are you? I simply mean, do you live your life in such a responsible way that you don't have to make provisions for a preacher to lie about you at your funeral? That sounds pretty specific, right? Almost silly. But this is exactly what one woman in history had to do. And hopefully, by telling you about this, it'll make you think a little bit about how you live your life. See, her name was Elizabeth Cresswell. She was born in Aldgate, England around the year 1624 during the reign of King Charles II. If you ever want a very interesting historical figure to read about, King Charles II is your man. But she lived during this time, and she grew up in the home of a middle-class family, very comfortable, and she made decisions that she did not have to make for herself. She chose to make these decisions. It was not forced upon her. She became a streetwalker, a prostitute. And a lot of women did that back then because they felt like they needed to. But Elizabeth Cresswell didn't need to, and she still did it anyway. I guess she thought that that was for her. But as her looks began to fade, she became a bawd, or a madam of her own brothel. And it wasn't to be any kind of brothel, it was just a very specific kind. You know, the upscale, the expensive kind, very upmarket kind, the kind that catered to the aristocracy. When she staffed her brothel, she enticed young women of superior education to not only be able to relate to her clientele on a sexual level, but on an intellectual level likewise. And so she was known as the Countess of the Exchange because her brothel was located so close to the Royal Exchange. It was said of her girls that they master your breeches and take all your riches. And their services were so expensive by design that the only people who really could afford them were the aristocracy. So that's who she was. But see, she couldn't ever keep herself out of trouble, even though she was on the high end of that kind of life. You know, that's on the other side of the track for most of us. But on the other side of the track, she was up there. But she couldn't keep herself out of trouble. She would break laws that we would find kind of silly, but they were laws in that time in that country. I see a couple times she would have her brothels raided by the authorities, and they would find them stripped down to the waist, drinking wine on the Lord's Day, and toasting to their genitalia. This would land her in court and subsequently in prison. But she'd do this time and time again. So she'd go to prison, come back out, and I mean, it sounds silly, right? Why can't you drink wine, strip down to your waist in a brothel on the Lord's Day, and toast your genitalia? That's just the way they were. And some things don't make sense. Like even in Indonesia right now, brothels are legal, but chewing gum is not. This world's just full of all sorts of silly, dichotomous laws. Anyway, so having said that, eventually she took on a lover named John Player. That's right, that's exactly what his name was. It wasn't even an alias. He was within the layers of government. But his name was John Player. And he got himself into trouble financially. So she bankrolled her lover. And when he could not pay up, and she could not either, she's the one who went to prison for him. She ended up in Bridewell prison and stayed there and died at the age of 60. But one of the last requests that she ever made was she wanted a preacher to speak well of her, and only well of her, at her funeral. And the one that could do that would get 10 pounds from her. Now, that sounds odd, right? She actually had to pay somebody to do that. And they did find somebody to do that. We don't know his name, but we do know what he said. At least that stood out. Here's what he said at her funeral of Elizabeth Cresswell. By the will of the deceased, it is expected that I should mention her and say nothing but well of her. All that I shall say of her, therefore, is this: she was born well, she lived well, and she died well, for she was born with the name Cresswell. She lived in Clerkenwell, and she died in Bridewell. That's the best he could do. I've known people like that. Maybe not people who ran a brothel, maybe not people that far on the other side of the track, but I've been to a funeral or two where the speaker actually had to lie about the deceased. Don't live your life like that. Live your life in such a way that whatever is said in honesty, and the people around you, the people who loved you, could be proud. I don't know what else I could really say to that. I can't define what living well is for you. You see, this is both subjective and objective. We have authorities higher than ourselves. We are not an authority in and of ourselves to be able to say what is living well. We might have an idea, and in a sense, we are an authority in that way to ourselves. That's why it is subjective. But it's also objective because there is certain things that society and the people that we love will accept and will not accept, regardless of what you think. See, I've been reading a lot about Al Capone. Al Capone, although he was a butcher, he really thought he was a good person because he employed 5,000 to 7,000 people. He performed acts of generosity, acts of charity, and he thought that that would outweigh all the monstrosities. But so that's why I say it's subjective, but it's also objective because there are societal norms. There's what we accept and what we don't accept. There's the law, and then there's God. And we can choose to acknowledge or not acknowledge those things and live well according to those things. Or we can delay them. If we choose not to deal with it up front, we can delay it and then have to deal with it on the end. And that's what Elizabeth Cresswell did. And so I hope you think to yourself today, how do I live? Do I live well? Could well be spoken of me at the end? Could well be spoken of you now? Because that's really the test. If you can do that now, when you get to the end, you won't have anything to worry about. So anyway, there you have it. There's Elizabeth Cresswell, and I'm using that to challenge you to live well. I hope it's meant something to you. If it has, share it with somebody, like the video, and subscribe, because I've got a lot more like that. If you haven't checked out my other videos, please do so, and I will catch you in the next one. Have a great day, guys. Catch you later. Bye-bye.